And we're live. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever or whenever you are. You have found yourself in an audio guide. It's going to be over the presidents Truman and Eisenhower. Those of you in my class, room 1206, Bacon County High School, Alma, Georgia, I'm Mr. David Swanson. This is going to be a shorter class than usual because we're just going to take a small bite. We're going to talk about two presidents today. Of course, you know that you are in your U.S. History Toolbox, Unit 5. If you're watching this video, it's either because you've not been in class, you need to catch up on our learning, or maybe I'm not in class and Army National Guard drill or any other reason at all. And still, we're going to still have class. We're going to still get after our learning here today, talking about presidents, the presidents of U.S. history, specifically presidents of the Cold War. And then, of course, we'll slide into the presidents of the modern era. We've already come through the basic mechanics of the Cold War. We had several classes about the international and domestic issues that comprise the Cold War. And we talked about some of these presidents along the way. Well, the last bit of our class here, right? We're screeching into the finish line, almost like we're on two wheels, exhausted. What's our illustration been all semester long? You got to paddle hard on that surfboard. You got to paddle hard into the wave and ride that wave to the finish line. Students in my class, you'll recognize that illustration. That's where we are right now. We're paddling real hard. Our arms are tired, but we're about to catch that wave right into the finish line. We got the Georgia State end of course examination, the EOC coming up. So now is not the time to get tired, lazy, or quit. Now's the time to push hard to the finish line, which is exactly what we're doing. So the learning today, it matters. Now, the class is a little bit shorter, so I'll give you time to kind of either go backwards, catch up on anything you missed. There's reading and reflection questions. There's a couple articles and reflection questions. So catch up on anything you may have missed we've already spoken of. Or at the end of the block, you can push forward. Once you conclude this audio guide, you can push forward in your study packet as well. So here are the men that we're going to be speaking of. In the room, you can kind of turn to your right-hand side and you'll see the presidential wall. These are the gentlemen that are going to be on the lower row, the bottom row. So you see their picture there, and then underneath them is their accomplishments. Those are the accomplishments we'll talk about in the scope of this class. Certainly, there's more things that each of these men did before our class. This is the summary that we're going to give to each presidency. You've seen this picture before. We call this the presidents of the Cold War era. Truman through Reagan. Our guy Ronnie knows that it's almost his turn. Probably getting excited. He might self-actualize. He might actually come to life and be here for the class on his presidency. Who knows? And then, of course, we're going to get into what we call the presidents of the modern era. Our class will end with the election of 2008, President Obama. But, of course, history is always growing, and current events are history in the making. We'll talk about Presidents Trump and Biden as well. So go ahead and open your toolbox now and turn to the page that has a picture of President Truman and President Eisenhower. I'm going to call this the presidential baseball card. I don't know how many kids still have baseball cards, but do you know what's on a baseball card? On the front is a picture. So just like we have the picture of the man. And then on the back, what's on the back of a baseball card? Did I hear someone say statistics? You're exactly right. So on the back of a baseball card, there we go. We got Chip Jones, one of Atlanta's finest. The back of a baseball card is statistics. You're going to basically be creating a baseball card for each president. I've given you the picture, and then you're going to write down the statistics of his presidency. And by the time we're done with this unit's set of notes, the toolbox, you'll have a nice, tidy study guide, set of notes listing the man and his accomplishments. And it's going to be it's going to be good for your benchmark exam and for the EOC. So on the opener slide, let's just get to it. On the opener slide, each opener slide is going to look like this. The baseball card, I want you to write down what is right there. So the whole set of it, no matter the color, write down what's on this opener slide underneath the words Harry S. Truman. Okay, these are his statistics of his presidency. Now, you'll notice that there are a couple of other cells. We're going to talk about some more specifics inside of that presidency. But I still want you to write down this basic information right here. This is the baseball card. So briefly, we have spoken of President Truman before, and you should remember most of this. He gets his start as President Roosevelt's vice president. And then, of course, he becomes president when FDR dies. A lot of people call him the accidental president. He was not necessarily even the first choice for FDR's fourth vice president. FDR was in his fourth term, and Truman was kind of an agreed upon, suitable vice president, not super powerful or controversial. He'll do, okay? He'll do just nice. Well, guess what? The vice president is always one heartbeat away from the presidency. So when President Roosevelt dies, all of a sudden we have the man right here, the vice president becomes the president. And I told you the story on his very first day in office. He gets a knock at the door, and some national security advisors are there to inform him of the Manhattan Project, this secret scientific research project to develop a nuclear bomb, an atomic bomb. So on the day he becomes president, he also learns of this new super weapon. As vice president, he hadn't been looped in, but all of a sudden he's looped in, and he's responsible for making the decision on whether to use them or not. Well, as we learned in class, he authorizes their use on a, quoting marks, purely military target. He authorizes the military to make that decision as long as the Japanese have been previously warned. The military does drop leaflets over the city of Hiroshima, warns the citizens of the city to get out or face a large bombing. And 2 days later, the first bomb is dropped on the city of Hiroshima. Debatable as to whether it was a purely military target or not. Certainly there were senior citizens, women, children, hospitals, churches, schools also affected in the city. Small military presence, but the civilian infrastructure was largely affected. Many civilians died as well. So history kind of debates, was that a justified use of the bomb? Hiroshima, Nagasaki, these are the two events that convinced the Japanese to surrender. And of course, this is a piece of President Truman's legacy. In the Cold War, we've already spoken of the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan. I call the Truman Doctrine the playbook, the Marshall Plan a play out of the playbook. Remember, Marshall's always going to be associated with money. M and M, Marshall and money. Another play out of the playbook is containment and splash zone. Anybody getting nervous here? I'm just in a video. I can't splash you today, but we illustrated containment by saying that without a lid on it, communism is free to spread. Well, containment, when I put a lid on it, communism was contained to where it already was in the world, contained to certain countries, and we stop the spread of it through a variety of policies. Containment is the lid. And finally, at home, we spoke of President Truman's integration of the military through Executive Order 9981. So kind of his life statistics there, or his presidential statistics. Make sure you have that on your notes. A little bit of a background about the man, and I am going to do this for every president. I think we need to know the people who become the president. Harry S. Truman, so presidents come from a variety of backgrounds and a variety of jobs. Harry S. Truman probably wasn't set towards on a path towards the White House in his growing up years. His profession was that he was a haberdasher. Does anybody know what a haberdasher is? I didn't figure. A haberdasher is a men's tailor or clothing maker. He was in a business. He had a business where he was he made fine clothing, suits, ties, vests, pants for men, and he was a tailor as well. He could adjust it for size. So a lot of times we think a president has to be a lawyer or has a master's degree or a doctorate's degree, lots of education. Actually, only one president had a doctorate degree. So not all of them. I don't know what you think a president, what education they're supposed to have, but only one president had a doctorate's degree. President Truman comes from owning the family business of a men's tailor shop. So all that to say that you can become president from whatever your background is, and you don't necessarily have to have been in politics your whole life. You don't have to walk towards the White House with a career as a politician. They come in many different shapes, sizes, backgrounds, and experience levels as well. Picture you see here, this is Captain Harry S. Truman serving in World War I. He was a captain of field artillery, and I'll let you read the blurb there about his backgrounds. He is a veteran. So when it comes to thinking about sending the boys to war, he has those experiences in his background. I think that's important for a president. If you're going to use the military, you should probably have a background in understanding what it means to be used in the military. So he was a soldier, and he did not take lightly the burdens of deploying the military or sending off young men and women to war. So just a little bit of background about the man right there. Slide here, you already seen this. This shows, well, previously what was segregation in the military. I'll change the words there and show the desegregation of the military, a major civil rights event about 15 years before the height of the civil rights movement. So President Truman was about 15 years ahead of the rest of the country. And very often the military is about 15 years ahead of the rest of the country socially as well. We absolutely see that in 1948 with Executive Order 9981 and the integration of the military. Next, what we need to talk about for Harry Truman today, and this is additional to his baseball card. You see it on your notes right there, the GI Bill. So officially, it's the GI Bill of Rights, and that language kind of harkens back to our original Constitution, which has a Bill of Rights. Well, this is a Bill of Rights for GIs, or GI is slang for a soldier. We kind of talked about what the typical American GI was. GI stands for government issue. And where we get that is that a lot of supplies heading over to the theaters of war during World War II was stamped GI. Whether it was guns or bullets or clothing or food, the box was stamped GI, meaning it was government issued. Well, that phrase just began to apply to the soldiers as well, almost as if they were issued by the government. And that kind of gives us the phrasing as well, GI Joe. Who's Joe? Joe's just your average soldier, GI Joe. So a GI, that's referring to the soldier and all the soldiers returning home. The GI Bill was a law passed in 1944 to help returning veterans buy homes and pay for higher education, college. So what does it provide? It provides low interest loans for homes and businesses for soldiers returning from World War II, and financial grants for those who wanted to attend college. Why would this matter? Well, it was important because it held off a potential post-war unemployment crisis. We had just snatched ourselves out of the Great Depression. Okay, the mobilization of the wartime economy kind of snatches us out of the difficulties of the Great Depression, the financial down of the Depression. Well, our country put people to work. Well, with the military downsizing, you don't need as many soldiers, sailors, Marines when you're not fighting two wars. We potentially had a lot of unemployment veterans on our hands. Well, what should we do with these potentially unemployed people? Send them to college, right? It's time to get a higher education. And this opened doors for a lot of these young men and women that they may have never previously even envisioned that for themselves. I'm a farm boy. I'm good with my hands. I work on machinery. I work the land. Well, if college is available to you for free, if the government is going to back the loan or even pay for your college, hey, maybe I am a college man after all. So what this is going to get us is a lot of higher education in the country, higher levels of educated individuals opening businesses, running the economy, eventually running government, running for office and running the government and running the country. So very positive opportunity for the government to give back to those who have given us so much as well. We're also in this time period where consumerism is expanding. People are purchasing want items like furniture, appliances, electric appliances, other household goods. So the GI Bill helped drive the post-war economy, as well as rewarded veterans and their families for the sacrifices made during the war. The GI Bill does still exist to this day, and I'm a recipient of it. I'm a beneficiary of the GI Bill. I bought my home right here in Alma, Georgia, with a GI Bill loan, home loan. So the GI Bill loan, this is a little bit more than you need to know. The GI Bill loan is the lowest interest rate of any loan you can find. If you have access to the GI Bill, you're going to use that loan. So First National Bank or Pineland Bank or any other bank around, they're not going to offer an interest rate lower than the GI Bill loan. So for homes. So if you have access to it, if you are a veteran and you have these benefits to your name, that's what you're going to use. So me personally, obviously you want to serve the country and do well, serve the people around you, serve your community. But hey, one of the personal benefits is this financial perk where you can have a low interest rate home loan. Same thing for college. I just recently finished a master's degree, and I paid this many dollars. I don't know if you can see, that's a $0 for my master's degree because I went on the GI Bill educational benefits. So online degree these days, the internet, online degree, I paid $0 because of my service to the country. You guys know that when the recruiters come in here and they're offering, they're trying to entice you to their service, Army, Navy, Air Force, National Guard, whatever. What's the first thing they throw at you? Educational benefits. Yes, it's a job, it's training, it's a lifestyle. There's a salary involved. You get paid for your job, and this is an extra benefit. Low interest rate, home loan, free college, right? Free college is definitely something those recruiters are going to be throwing at you. A couple pictures here just to round out the GI Bill. You can see he's pointing at the GI Bill of Rights. And these are the things that I've kind of already said. You see the poster there. Veterans, if you're buying a farm, home, or business, learn about guaranteed loans. And that kind of rounds out Harry S. Truman. There you have it. Our first president of the class and your first presidential baseball card. Moving right along to, well, not General Eisenhower. That's the man who led the D-Day invasion. That's the Supreme Allied Commander who would eventually have 5 stars on his shoulders. He's a 5-star general. We don't even have a 5-star general rank today. Today, the highest commander is a 4-star general, but because he was a joint multinational allied forces commander, Dwight Eisenhower actually carried the rank of 5 stars. Look on his shoulder boards there. You can see that. Let's do a little swap up here. He's a military man turned politician. This is President Dwight D. Eisenhower. So there you have it on his baseball card. Write this down. He was a 5-star general during World War II. He was the leader of the Normandy D-Day invasion. In his presidency, he brings an end to the Korean War. Now, is the war over? No. In fact, that statement is so wrong on 2 levels. It wasn't a declared war, nor is it over. But Eisenhower's presidency is responsible for negotiating the armistice, the laying down of the arms, establishing the 38th parallel as a demilitarized zone, which still exists today between North Korea and South Korea. President Eisenhower is responsible for that. We've already had the conversation about the Korean War. In his presidency, we're going to talk about the National Interstate and Defense Highways Act, which is going to give us over 42,000 miles of highways in our country today. And we're going to talk about his experiences with the phenomenon known as McCarthyism. So you see both of those on your notes, those out a little bit further. Now, we've already talked about the man as a military. You already know he's a West Point graduate. I actually told you he was a bad cadet. He walked over 200 punishment hours. That's how they punish you at West Point. They take your time. They don't whip you. They don't flog you. They don't put you in the brig. The worst thing you can lose as a cadet is your time. So Cadet Eisenhower does a variety of infractions, being out late, smoking in the barracks, not coming to breakfast formation, the variety of small infractions earns him over 200 punishment hours as a cadet. If you walk 100 hours, you're called a century man. Eisenhower walking 200 hours was a double century man. Bad cadet. Guess what? Still became a 5-star general and president of the United States. So sometimes it's not how you start out, it's how you finish. It's not what puts you down, it's you getting back up. So just a little bit extra about the life and leadership of President Eisenhower. 1952, he's recently out of the military, and he is clearly a candidate for the presidency. But the question is, which party does he belong to? Actually, Ike has never belonged to a party. Ike has never voted. I know. We preach to young people, register to vote, vote. Well, Eisenhower, as a military man, thought it doesn't matter who the president is. I'm here to serve either way. So he literally never voted his entire military career because he didn't think that the politics of it mattered. He was a soldier going to do his duty no matter who was in the White House. Well, on the other side of his career, he has to make a choice, right? To run for office, you belong to one of the 2 major parties. And the question became, which party is Eisenhower going to belong to? Presidential candidate Eisenhower, what is he? He probably could have easily won the Democratic nomination and been swept into the White House as a Democrat. but he chooses the Republicans. He runs as a Republican, and here's why. He believed that the Truman administration had grown a little bit corrupt. Democrats have been in power since President Roosevelt, 4 terms. President Eisenhower finishes out a term and then gets a term of his own. Democrats have been in power for 20 years. He felt the need to distance himself from the Democrat policies and the Democrat corruption that he was perceiving. And he didn't want to spend his administration apologizing for the past. He wanted to distance himself from the past, start fresh as a Republican. So he runs as a Republican candidate, and of course he wins. That's why we're talking about him here today. His name is Eisenhower, but a nickname for Eisenhower is often Ike. And you know how political campaign slogans go. They got to rhyme or they got to be memorable. His slogan became, "I like Ike." So that is an actual campaign button. You can see it looks a little bit old. Pretty cool little item there. I like Ike. Ike, of course, is swept into office in the 1952 presidential election, and he will live a presidency of relatively non-controversy. See, a lot of times the presidents who are in wartime presidents or the presidents who have scandals, corruption, controversy, those are the presidents that historians like to write about and gossip about and tell their stories because there's something real concrete and interesting to talk about. War, scandal, controversy, lies, stealing, mistresses. Those are the kind of presidents that make for interesting storytelling. Eisenhower, he kind of lives through, I'll make a connection here, an era of good feelings. Our 5th president, James Monroe, he also has a very controversy-free presidency, leads through the so-called era of good feelings, and quite frankly, is kind of considered a boring president because of it. If you really know Ike's presidency, you don't think he's boring, but from a historical perspective, some of his accomplishments are just a little less sexy than the other presidents leading through war or creating their own scandals and controversies. I love Eisenhower. I like Ike because he does, he's responsible for staving off some conflict. He's responsible for tamping down, keeping down Cold War tensions that we will later see rear their ugly heads in a different kind of way. So Eisenhower, maybe not the sexiest presidential administration, but a very successful 8 years. He will be the president for 8 years. All right, let's talk about some of his unsexy accomplishments. First one here is the National Interstate and Defense Highway Act. Wow, that sounds not as awesome as watching a movie about D-Day. I get it, right? If this is his major accomplishment, not quite as interesting as the presidents who lead through major battles. Well, this is something that affects your life on a daily basis, and it might not be super interesting, but it is super important. In the year 1956, President Eisenhower provides funds for the construction of 2,500 miles of roads throughout the United States. The original purpose of these interstates was actually not so that you could go on vacation in Orlando. It wasn't so you could hop on I-95 and go to Miami and catch a cruise ship. It wasn't so you could drive faster to grandma's house. The original purpose was to support the military's need to transport troops and supplies around the country quickly in the event of a large military conflict. See, Eisenhower, as a young soldier, he had actually driven across the country on the old 2-lane roads, dusty, many of them dusty and unpaved, and it took him over 60 days to go from coast to coast. He was moving military bases. He got orders to go report to a new military base. It took him 2 months to drive across the country. Well, as president, he realizes, and having fought another world war, he realizes that if we ever have to mobilize quickly again, that is not going to be sufficient. We need to get our men, weapons, and equipment to port quickly. So the old 2-lane system of roads became inadequate as the country grew. What this provides for is new routes and wider roads constructed to connect population centers across the country. So going from state highways to 2-lane roads, maybe paved, but probably dirt, we now get an interstate system that looks like this: overpasses, underpasses, connectors, joints, the urban sprawl all around. And most importantly is that it is useful to the transportation networks of the country. Previously, canals, okay, the best we could do is connect to the Mississippi River by canals, moves to the Transcontinental Railroad and the rail network that spawns off of that. Now, the modern marvel is going to be this interstate highway system. When I say interstate, I want to make clear I'm talking about the Blue Shield 2 numbers highway system, not State Route 32, not State Route 23, but I-95, I-10. I grew up in Oklahoma, always driving on I-40 and I-35. Those are the two that cut through Oklahoma City. I'm going to show you how they get their numbers here in just a second. But I want you to keep in mind, we're talking about the roads that start with an I. Around here, we drive on I-95 a lot. If you get down into Florida, you might drive on I-10 to get to Destin or Pensacola. So this is useful to the military, and it changes population patterns as well. It gives a rise to suburbia. Suburbia means that people can live farther away from the city. See, previously, if you worked at a factory in that urban center, Chicago, Boston, Cleveland, Atlanta, whatever, you needed to live pretty close to where you worked, because in order to get to work on time, you had to wake up and get to work and be on time. You couldn't possibly live 30 miles away because there was no way to get to work on time. It wouldn't be practical. Well, these interstates give a rise to what we would call suburban areas or suburbs, because now we'll just take Atlanta, for example. If you work in Atlanta, you can live in McDonough. And from McDonough, you're about 35 minutes away from downtown Atlanta, but you're only 35 minutes away because you can get on an interstate and drive there. Otherwise, if you had to take a 2-lane road from McDonough to Atlanta, it would take hours. Today, people can live in McDonough, hop on the interstate, drive to Atlanta, do their job, get back on the interstate, and drive back home. A suburb is a smaller city outside of the main urban hub. So in addition to the military usefulness, semi-trucks, of course, transporting equipment across the country, helps you go on vacation. You hop on the interstate, drive to wherever you want to drive to, whatever beach you want to drive through. But it also creates a whole new way of living called suburbs, sometimes called suburbia. This is one of the most complex exchanges in the country. This is in Atlanta. It's called Spaghetti Junction. So this first picture I saw, underpasses, overpasses, there's a lot going on there, but I can kind of follow each road with my eyes. This right here called Spaghetti Junction, y'all, I don't know how people drove this before GPS, right? If you're like me, or if your parents are like me, just put the phone on the dash and you follow where it's telling you to turn. It even animates, take this turn right here. Spaghetti Junction, it's called that because it kind of looks like a bowl of spaghetti, right? All the roads crisscrossing, and you can't really follow any of them with your eyes. Spaghetti Junction is essentially a modern marvel and really illustrates the complexity of the interstate system. Here's a map of the original 42,500 miles that were drawn out by Eisenhower. I want you to think of it like this. If the United States is a body, these interstates are the veins that take our blood throughout our body. You know how your body works. Your heart pumps blood through veins throughout the whole vessel. So the heart of the country, maybe that northeastern area where a lot of the veins converge, but then it pumps the blood throughout the rest of the country through these main veins and arteries. Pretty good illustration. So, take your body and then apply it to the interstate. Each of those dark lines is life-giving blood pumping through the body. And you know how it is. If you don't have good blood flow to your feet get cold. And if it lasts long enough, you might even have to amputate the thing. Well, if you can't get supplies to San Francisco is gonna die. That's why these roads connecting the country east to west, north to south, much like the railroad did previous to it, now these roads give access to even more transportation, goods, services, expansion, people moving, and back to the important point, military usefulness. That's why Eisenhower funded the system in the first place. Eisenhower funds it, but it doesn't get entirely built inside of his administration. It does take several years to build the entire thing. This is another illustration 50 years later showing 46,000, almost 47,000 miles of federally funded interstates. And here we can start to see the numbers. start to see how they connect to those major cities: Memphis, Dallas, Chicago, Salt Lake City, Utah, LA, San Francisco. Each of those black squares, that'd be like a new heart, right? So I know in your body you only have one heart, but each of those major cities is a heart. And from the heart, the veins and arteries pump the blood outward, or in this case, it's not blood, it's goods, services, people, military equipment. So I hope I'm making sense with that illustration there, as I say it several times in a row. Have you ever wondered how these interstates get their names? Well, I wondered, and I went and found out. Check this out. Let me teach you something today. Looking at this map right here, we see the country, okay? And we see roads that are going horizontally, east to west. You see that? You see the numbering on the roads. What's the commonality? Did somebody say that they all end in 0? Yes. So the naming system for highways, from south to north, we go with a low number to a higher number ending in 0. So the southernmost interstate, which a lot of y'all have probably driven on starting in Jacksonville, maybe Destin or Pensacola, Interstate 10, I-10. So if somebody tells you they're traveling on I-10, you know that they're in the southern part of the country. That's the system. If somebody tells you they're driving on I-90, that's the northernmost east and west running interstate, you know that they are going across the top of the country, the northern portion of the country. I told you growing up in Oklahoma, did a lot of driving on I-40. I actually lived in a suburb right off of I-40. So for the perfect example of how if I wanted to get to Oklahoma City, that main hub, it didn't take very long. I'd leave my suburb neighborhood, hop on I-40, and could do anything I needed to do in Oklahoma City. I never worked there, but there's a lot of commerce and leisure in Oklahoma City. So just a personal example there. From south to north, low to high, ending in a 0. Okay, well, what about those that go from north to south, running north to south? Looks like this. You see these highways there run top to bottom, okay, north to south. And starting on the west coast or the left-hand side of the country, you got your low number, and these all end in 5. So if somebody says they're driving on I-5, you know they're driving on the west coast of the country. We might be a little bit more familiar with on the right-hand side of the screen, the east coast, I-95. How many of y'all have driven on I-95? I would imagine most of y'all. I-95 picks up in Savannah and basically goes into Jacksonville, and you could get all the way to Miami on I-95. Told you earlier, in Oklahoma City, I grew up driving on I-35. So I had a nice east-west and north-south junction between I-35 and I-40, both of them cutting right through Oklahoma City. So now you're a decoder. If someone tells you which interstate they're driving on, you can now understand whether they're in the north part of the country, south part of the country, east part of the country, or west part of the country based off of the number that they tell you. I got a challenge for you, and this is related to the topic. On these interstates, okay, and I told you they're the blue shield interstates, just like the picture, like on the picture you just saw. On these interstates, have you ever seen a sign that looks like this? You might say no, but that's only because you haven't noticed it before. You have seen these signs. This is how we honor General Eisenhower, President Eisenhower, and his system today. Now, I said general and president for a reason. I'll explain in just a second. My challenge for you is the next time you see one of these signs, send me a picture. Stop safely, okay, on the side of the highway. And every time I say this, students give me the stink eye, like it's the craziest thing in the world. If it's possible to pull to the shoulder of the road and safely take a picture with the sign, do it. Send it to me. If you're still in my class, I'll give you bonus points. If you're not still in my class, I'll just tell you I'm proud of you. Notice this. They're on the highway about every 25 to 50 miles. I'm really not quite sure. They're a little bit irregular. As I've driven the highway, and I've driven a lot of highways in my life, I'm always keeping my eyes open for this. And I've observed they're on the side of the road about every 25 to 50 miles. Sometimes in a nice spot where you can see them very plainly. Sometimes maybe inside of the tree line or a little bit closer to the trees. So just keep your eyes open. The logo here, so it says Eisenhower Interstate System pretty plainly. The logo is Eisenhower's 5-star general rank. So even though he funds this as president, the logo of the sign kind of acknowledges his 5-star general rank. I think that's pretty cool. I think it also kind of suggests that the original purpose of the interstates was for military equipment to move from coast to coast quicker. So pretty cool. Pay attention to that. I would love to get a picture from y'all sometime in the future. All right, last bit here for our class of the day, McCarthyism. Now, McCarthyism isn't something that relates to Eisenhower directly. Okay, his name is not involved in what this is, but it's something that he had to lead through. This is something that happens inside of his presidency. He has to lead through it. McCarthyism uses this man's name, okay, Senator McCarthy. McCarthyism is the practice of making accusations of disloyalty and treason towards your country, especially related to communism. Basically, it's a witch hunt for communists. Have we talked about this before? You might first think about the Salem witch trials, where young women and some men were accused of being witches. You're a witch. Tell me you're not. As soon as that accusation is made, it sticks. All of a sudden, you have to prove that you're not. Well, we see the same thing here with the accusation of being a communist. Communist, that's a communist right there. Prove to me that you're not. You can't. You're a communist. You might say a Red Scare. We've had the Red Scare number 1 following World War I. This is essentially Red Scare number 2. A witch hunt led by Senator Joseph McCarthy between the years 1950, 1954, aka a second Red Scare. These accusations were often unfair and without regard for sufficient evidence. Unfounded, unfair, and unfounded. The story is that Senator McCarthy was a lesser-known senator from Wisconsin. He was the junior senator. And until February of 1950, when he makes a name for himself, he claims to possess a list of 205 card-carrying communists employed within the Department of State. He says they're in our government, they're in our military, they're in our labor force, and if we don't do something about it, they're going to take over our country. We've seen communism in practice in the Soviet Union. We were friends with the Russians through the war until we found conflict with administering Germany afterwards, Germany and Berlin. We don't love the Soviet Union anymore. We're adversaries with Soviet Union, okay? Good versus bad, good versus evil, capitalism versus communism, democracy and freedom versus oppression, okay? We see communism in action. Our whole government is based on putting a lid on it, containing communism to the countries it is in currently. We can't have this come to our country. So Senator McCarthy, with his accusations, he doesn't say any names. He says, I got a list and I need the power to subpoena, call them to the Senate to testify, and root them out. Well, he is given this power. He is given the power of a subcommittee in order to subpoena people to come and testify before the Senate. And he uses this power to make a name for himself over this 4-year period. So from that moment where he made these original accusations, Senator McCarthy became a tireless crusader against communism in the early 1950s. This period is commonly referred to as the Red Scare. As the chairman of the Senate Permanent Investigation Subcommittee, Senator McCarthy conducted hearings on communist subversion in America and investigated alleged communist infiltration of the armed forces. He has a rise in power, but then he also has a fall from power as well. Once he started accusing too many people without evidence, he lost credibility. And you know what his big mistake was? His big mistake was going after Hollywood. He actually had Walt Disney himself come and testify about accusations of communists inside of Hollywood. And ultimately, he accuses General Marshall and even then President Eisenhower of potentially being communist. So people started to say, all right, Eugene, enough's enough. You know what they say, the little boy that cried wolf. They believed him at first, but then he cried wolf too many times and people stopped believing him. And then, of course, the sad moral of that story is that eventually he cries wolf and there is a wolf. So McCarthy kind of lost the power of his accusations by accusing too many people. He was exiled from politics, not reelected. He was which and this kind of coincides with his name being used in a negative way. So McCarthyism, or even the phrase McCarthy-style tactics, a lot of times that gets used even in the present day when people are trying to describe a witch hunt or an accusation without fair or founded evidence. Senator Joseph McCarthy is known for his unfair and unfounded accusations of communists in the government. He has a rise in power and a fall from power. And the summary is that today, his name is synonymous with unfair, unfounded accusations, particularly at the time related to communism, but today it could be related to anything. Anytime someone's leading a witch hunt, you're going to also hear the phrase McCarthy. So there's a good paragraph on that in your toolbox if what I said didn't make sense or you need some elaboration. Rounded out like this, Eisenhower is remembered with the Dwight D. Eisenhower Memorial in Washington, D.C., recognizes his military service and his presidential accomplishments. Not one of the sexier presidential administrations. He actually leads through peace and actually avoids conflict with inside of the Cold War, and that should be considered a success. All right, hey, thanks for tucking in today. We talked through 2 presidents. I give you the rest of the hour to dive into your toolbox. Go backwards if you need to, push forwards if you have time, paddle hard to the finish line. Love you, mean it, miss you. Hope to see you, we'll be seeing you soon. As always, thanks for your time and attention. From room 1206, Mr. Swanson, signing off.